Hello and welcome back to the Comic Obsessive podcast. I'm Adam Piles,
And I'm Jason Dehart.
and we are talking about a pretty old property. Not old as in like, silver age of comics or anything, but it's got some miles on it. What are we talking about today, Jason?
We are talking about the world of Thundercats. And for fans out there, for our many, many followers, if you are a fan of stories about large anthropomorphic cats and you're like, is there anything other than Andrew Lloyd Webber? If you were disappointed in the Cats film, but you've read the T.S. Eliot book and you're like, what else is there that features large cats that are very human-like? I don't think you can go better than Thundercats.
You can't. What's your experience with Thundercats?
Well, when I was a very young person, I can't remember exactly how I got introduced to them because growing up in the 80s and 90s, as we've talked, was an exercise in franchising. There were the lunchboxes, there were the toys, there was the animated series, there were the comics. I will say it wasn't the comics because I didn't discover those until I think we were hanging out when I discovered those.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's probably some combination of the animated film and the toys, which some people say. I know Box Brown has a graphic novel out about this, about how like the '80s was capitalizing on childhood. The animated films and TV shows were kind of a commercial for the toys,
Yeah.
but it totally worked. It totally worked. And so I remember having a couple of the action figures, and I remember seeing some of the episodes. And it was one of those things like Silverhawks, which is making a comeback pretty soon, and like He-Man, Masters of the Universe. All of those stories kind of live in that space for me of just not superhero, but science fiction, fantasy, and superhero like with lots of interesting characters.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely in that heyday, like in the heart of the 80s, right?
Oh yeah,
The 80s cartoon craze. I think it was like literally in the middle of it. I think it was 85 that
yeah.
the cartoon came out. And I think that was my intro to it, was somehow I was able to see the Thundercats cartoon. Um, I'm not really sure how that happened. Maybe it was like at school, like after school. I rode a bus that where I went to school, there was a first load and a second load. And
Hmm.
it was that common for you too.
No, but it is now where I teach, so I
Okay.
totally get that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a big county. And so I was second load. And I think that, the teacher would put on cartoons while they kind of wrapped up their day and worked and everything. And we were just waiting on the bus. I think that's probably how I saw Thundercats. And I was hooked from the start. I mean, you want to talk about the perfect cartoons from the 80s. You got He-Man, you got Thundercats,
Hmm.
you got
Hmm.
Turtles, and you got Ghostbusters. To me, those are the four from the 80s that I haven't been able to escape. They're just firmly rooted in nostalgia for me. So,
Absolutely,
and
absolutely.
I didn't really think of it at the time like this, but I keep hearing how like Silverhawks was just Thundercats in space. And
Yeah, yeah.
I see like the similarity in animation, but I don't know. I didn't really have them that connected in my head. Like they were definitely of the same time period,
Hmm. Hmm.
and the animation was very similar. And were you a fan of Silverhawks?
I was. I didn't get as much access to it. I mean, there would be like the occasional action figure that I would see. Um, but I don't remember watching that series as much as Thundercats. I will say, even though they're similar, they're from the same production company.
Yeah,
They still have their own thing to me.
yeah,
I feel like that thing of like, oh, it's just Thundercats in space. Like you could do that with any story.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's
yeah.
just Romeo and Juliet set in the ocean, whatever it
Right.
happens to be. Like you could do that with any story if you want to do that to stories, but I enjoy both, and I'm looking forward to. This is in no way a commercial or anything, but Ed Brisson is writing the Silverhawk series that I guess probably Dynamite is doing next year or this year now. This year, this
Yeah.
is the 2025 edition. So yeah, I'm excited to see a little resurgence of that and kind of check back in with it because a lot of those characters are not clear in my head anymore.
Yeah, Silverhawks didn't have the the legs that Thundercats did, because
Hmm.
Thundercats has been redone several times, like several incarnations of it, Like
Yeah.
you had the cartoon, like the classic cartoon, you had the Star comics that we'll talk about in a minute. You had Thundercats from 2011, the cartoon series, which only
Hmm.
lasted for one season, but I really liked it. I thought it was really good.
Yeah, yeah, all the nostalgia vibes, absolutely.
And then they did something called Thundercats Roar,
Hmm.
which it was like more like maybe more for little kids. I'm not really sure about that one.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing about Silverhawks not making quite as much of a comeback, I wonder, and I'm just putting the question out there without Googling it first. I wonder if that was the decision of executives being like, is this that popular? But I also wonder if there were probably rights disputes, if there were different things like that that were happening, because I know, like, you and I are Marvel fans, and characters like Namor, for example, or Namor, however you want to say his name, like they've been trying to bring that character to life for a long time in film, but there were just so many hands in the proverbial kitchen sink. No, that's not right. Kitchen pot, is that right? No, no, we're not promoting marijuana. There were a lot of people involved, is what I'm saying.
Too many
So
cooks in the kitchen to get that
there it
to get
is.
that
There
meal
it is.
cooked. Is that there we go.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. There it
All right.
is. There's that metaphor. So
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. It just makes me wonder if there were some of those conversations and complications happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. It's funny what gets a resurgence, and what does and what doesn't. It's I don't know. I've always found that interesting. But Thundercats, man, I love me some Thundercats.
Who
Uh,
is your favorite cat?
it would have to be. I mean, I like them all. I really
Hmm.
do. I wasn't that wild about Wily Kit and Wily Cat.
Yeah, they seem like extras to me.
Yeah, I guess that was also the age where, probably the beginning of the age where, like, everything had to have a kid, you know,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
I didn't really care about that. I wanted to see the stories about adults. But to answer your question, probably just Panthro.
Yeah, yeah. If my favorite cat would not be Sammy Davis Jr.,
Hmm.
because he was a cool cat,
Yeah,
I would totally go with like Panthro as well. Not to
yeah,
glom onto your answer, but he's just the bomb. He really is. I mean, obviously Lion-O is a good choice. He's a very good choice, but and Chitara. Is
hmm,
that right?
yeah,
A cool character as well. But Panthro, just there was something about his look, his design, and he has a pretty central role in the issue that we're going to be talking about first today. So that's a
yeah,
really nice fit as well.
definitely. And a little bit of trivia. You know who voiced Panthro in the '80s cartoon?
Oh, I did look up some trivia. I did look up some trivia. Shall we do like a multiple choice response
Oh
for our
yeah,
listeners out there? All right, listeners, if you're listening, you would be listeners. If you're a cook in the kitchen right now and you're listening, would it be A, Richard Roundtree, B, Earl Hyman, or C, Larry Kinney? Go ahead and lock those answers in, friends. Slide right, click that buzzer. What'll it be, Adam? What's the answer?
he was the voice. The voice. He played Cosby's dad on the
Mhm.
Cosby Show.
Can we say Cosby? Is that okay? Can we
Yeah, I
do?
know. I
Yeah,
know. It's got a bit of a,
yeah.
yeah, shadow over it now. But
Hmm. Hmm.
which I found it interesting that he was the dad on Cosby, because, like, I mentioned Turtles as a cartoon highly influential from the '80s, and Shredder was the dad, was Uncle Phil from,
Really?
yeah, from Fresh Prince.
How funny! I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't. I only discovered that a handful of years ago, but once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah.
So what was the answer on that?
Oh, what's his name?
Earl Hyman?
Yeah, yeah, there we go. Earl
Yeah.
Hyman. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
That was option B for those of you playing at home. Circle gets the square. You can move ahead
circle.
2 spaces.
I haven't heard that phrase in a long time. Circle gets the square.
I don't actually know what that means, but
Yeah,
I don't get geometry.
yeah. What was that? Was a show. Anyway, that was a that was an '80s show too, wasn't it? Like an
Hmm.
yeah, I forget what it was, some game show. But so we're talking about Star Comics and Thundercats to begin with. Is that right? Is that what we're starting with? The
I believe
Thundercats
so.
10.
I think that that'll work well.
Star Comics was an imprint of Marvel Comics, and
Hmm.
it held the rights to a lot of the stuff we've been talking about. Like there was a Star Comic series of He-Man. It ran for 14 issues.
Yeah.
And then Thundercats, they did Care Bears, they did the Get Along Gang, they did Muppet Babies, I think. They did just a lot of more kid-oriented properties, but it was still Marvel, but it was just an imprint of Marvel. And I think I don't know if I can call him a friend of the show, but Tom DeFalco, I think, was
He's a
spear
friend. We hang out on the weekends. We're best friends now.
best friends.
He's been on one episode, so best friends.
Best friends. I think he spearheaded Star Comics. I would have to look that one up,
Ah,
but I think
nice.
that was one of his projects. But we're not starting with Thundercats number one. That tells the origin and everything. We're kind of getting more into the meat of the series. It ran for about 24 issues, and as a side note, if anybody is a big fan of Thundercats and the Star Comics series, I think sometime in the next few months you'll be able to get the entire collection as a
Hmm.
trade paperback or a hardback too. I think
Nice.
you can go to Kickstarter right now and just look it up. I think it's live right now that you can go and pledge to get the entire Thundercats series in a trade paperback, which I'm looking forward to. I think I'll
Yeah.
be purchasing that.
I'll do some exploring, and if that link is out there live for listeners, I will drop it into the video so that they can see what that Bitly looks like.
Yep. So I think we're going to start with Thundercats 10,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
like we said, a panthro-centric. That's kind of hard to say. Panthro-centric issue, which
Yep.
right up our alley. Us being big,
Absolutely.
us being passionate about Panthro. You know.
We were pathro passionate people on a podcast. Turning pages. Okay, I'm gonna stop.
Yeah.
But yeah, you mentioned that this kind of goes to the heart, and for listeners out there that are like, "What about if I don't know the Thundercats? Can I jump in?" Well, we're going to tell you in the segment that we're going to be doing on this episode about the Dynamite series how they negotiate some of that, because I think it's brill how they did that. Brill. So as we jump in, this kind of feels like an episode of the show, which it should. It mirrors that story dynamic, and there's actually a fair amount of things happening in this brief little book. There
Yeah.
are a couple of stories going on, really, because hashtag teen books are hard to write,
Hmm.
I'm sure. And so there's like an A story, there's a B story. They kind of join together by the end. So I'm going to give you the quick and dirty, the skinny on all of this. And giving a shout out, we have Jerry Conway as the writer, Jose Delbo as the penciler. I don't know Jose's work outside of this.
I don't
Al
either.
Gordon as the inker. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying I don't know that penciler either.
Oh, yes, yeah. Janice Chiang as the letterer, Petra Scotese as the colorist, Don Daly as there are a lot of editors here. So Don Daly is the editor, Mr. Tom DeFalco, BFFFF of mine, executive editor, and Jim Shooter, who I've met one time at Heroes Con and talked to. So we're like basically pen pals at this point,
Yep.
editor in chief. And this is Graveyard of Memories, which is a really fitting title, and it starts with a nice splash page of Lino and Panthro searching in the underbrush. They are doing what I imagine large cats that have been in suspended animation and traveled through space would do. They are on a hunt. because that's how the kitty do. And they are, in particular, hunting for something called a rumpa, not to be confused with a Roomba. That is a more recent invention which will clean your house and scare your pets. I can imagine that your cats will probably chase a Roomba if they are not terrified of it. But the large anthropomorphic cats in this story are chasing Roompas, which, as it turns out, is a complicated endeavor. The Roompa kind of looks like a kangaroo a bit. They are ambushed. They are ambushed by some large bird-like creatures here that are jumping in to the story. And then Panthro is more or less separated from the crowd and stumbles into a strange mist-like universe. There's a nice panel of him saying, "Dead, that's it. This place smells dead," like a title card. Graveyard. Have you ever stumbled onto a strange land of mist, Adam?
I have. I work in the mountains, so yeah,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. Live up here in these mountains where you can just literally see the mist roll in.
Yeah, yeah.
Kind
I
of eerie.
used to, yeah, it's very eerie. I used to work at a school right down the road from a hookah shop. So
Oh,
I'm familiar with lands of mist. And those
yeah,
of you that do bathroom duty, and for those teacher listeners out there that have bathroom duty with adolescents, you probably have also stumbled onto some spaces where there's some mist involved. So
true.
stay off the drugs, kids. But essentially, Panthro is here kind of exploring this place. And in true fashion of the animated series, these three characters pop up. They're like ghosts, but they're not. They're sort of these ancestral creatures. And from here, the story, if you can believe it, complicates even further because on the page turn, as Panthro is being just a bad kitty and absolutely uh, trying to take these things down in a fashion that leads to a whirlwind. We then jump to the B story, where we have Chitara, we have Wily Cat and Wily Kit battling a large reptilian creature. And so, for those of you that enjoy the teen characters, in true fashion for a teen book, they are the teen teens, which kind of remind me of the shape-shifting twins in the Justice League books, the
Oh
Teen
yeah,
Titan books from around this time. I can totally see like some of that inspiration maybe coming through.
yeah. I get that.
Yeah. And so they are kind of in their own space for about a page before they too are enraptured by a strange sense of haze and mist. And so I'll read this panel, but there's something odd about the haze. It isn't moist, for those of you that like the word moist, the way a ground fog should be, and it clings to the skin, crawling over their fur like a million small insects seeking food. Gasping, the Thundercats struggle for breath. So basically, they're caught in a mystical Dutch oven experience
Mm.
at this point. And so this story links up with Panthro. Panthro's back. The team more or less assembles, and I'm kind of simplifying some of the story here because there are other things in between. And then we get to meet the creature behind some of these things that are happening, a new leader of the mutants. And so that's kind of where the story ends as Panthro is taking on this new mystical, mythological character, Ashtar, which sounds uncomfortable. And so they fight Ashtar, and Panthro is battling this creature. He is sort of at a difficult moment in the fight when in jumps who?
Lion-O and the Thundercats.
Lion-O and the Thundercats are on the scene, and Lion-O jumps in with this large thing. It's kind of cool and echoes back to the animated series. In one panel, we have Ashtar in the focus looking over Panthro's shoulder, and from somewhere off to the side in Captain America and Sam Wilson style, we hear Thundercats. 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 And then Lion-O says Thundercats ho. So there is some language involved in the book. You should be aware of that, listeners. And they jump in. Lion-O summons the mystical emblem of the Thundercats, which is what I do when I'm in trouble. I actually have a sticker that Drew Moss gave me at Heroes Con last year. So I just summon it when I'm in trouble. And they then kick the tail of Ashtar. At least by the end of the issue. The story continues from there, but as Panthro says at the very end in the last panel, now it's over.
Yep. And he
How
has.
was that as a read-through summary? Was that all right?
I liked it.
Thanks.
He wanted to fix the like when he was attacked the first time. He destroyed almost what looks like a gravestone, but
Kind of a
um,
shrine.
yeah, a shrine to these spirits, and uh, that's when he says it's over after he fixes the stone that he broke originally. And it kind of goes back together, and he's actually even thanked. It says, "Thank you, man of flesh. It is not enough, but it will do." So, like,
Yeah.
they made peace with the spirit and everything. So, what did you think of the issue in general?
Lovely, lovely nostalgia. I'm glad that I was able to reread some of the Dynamite books because honestly, some of the parts of the story, some of the characters, and the way the story worked were not as fresh in my mind. But spoiler alert for listeners out there: Adam is an amazing co-podcaster and a great friend. So this book actually came from his private collection that he gave to me. He gifted me Thundercats issue 10. But I'm glad that Dynamite sort of brought this back because I've always loved these characters. They've always had kind of a special place in my nostalgia. It was nice to tap back into, and it feels like a complete story on its own while also being like an in continuity kind of thing. And it reminded me of something that we probably talked on the show before about when we've talked about Thor and other things, which is I didn't quite get it at the time, but now I look at these characters in the story and I appreciate how much of this is inspired by mythology, and in this case, Egyptian mythology.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, you got Mum Ra, the action figure who eluded me as a child. Um, and there are these pyramid structures. The cats are, of course, honored in at least if you can believe the Catwoman movie with Holly Berry, and I do. It's my Bible. They're sort of like
yeah.
honored in ancient Egyptian culture, and so it makes total sense that there would be some of this going on.
Well, they're supposed to be on Earth. They're supposed to be on our
Hmm.
planet, just like in the very far future. So
Yeah.
I assume that Mumra was of that era, not just in similarity to Egyptian culture, but he was from Egyptian culture.
Yeah.
I always found that interesting. I mean, it's a twist that's been done, a million times and all, but like the idea that you're on this fantasy world, but then you learn that it's actually our world, either the distant
Hmm.
past or the far future or something. I've always enjoyed that.
Yes,
Um,
yes. We all have our Charlton Heston moment where we're beating on
right,
the sand.
right. I really liked the story, and I thought it was, just so much more dense than a lot of modern comics can be. Like, just
Hmm.
so much more story. Like, the mutants attacked, and not like the X-Men, but we're talking that's what they called them in the Thundercats, the mutants that were the enemies of the Thundercats, and like the Thundercats got attacked in the middle of the issue, and that's when Panthro decides to go back and see if he has to sacrifice himself after they had all escaped, but they all ended up getting sick except for Panthro. And so that's just a lot of story in
It is.
22 pages or whatever. So I've always really appreciated that, or well, recently, I guess. Now that I, have the mindset to be able to compare the old stuff to the more modern era of comics, more modern storytelling. It's just so much more dense in these old issues a lot of
Yeah.
times.
Well, and it brings to mind a criticism of modern comics that I've heard, and I don't think it's totally without grounds, which is that sometimes publishing companies are stretching the stories out
Yeah,
month to month. They know there's a trade paperback coming, and so it works on TV shows. I used to be a fan of The Walking Dead, and you'd have those weeks where it's like, okay, it's a character building week.
right.
But when you're reading that in comic book form, sometimes it doesn't translate as well. And I think it's a fair statement that there is something to be said for the long game, but there's also something to be said for giving somebody a little bit of bang for their buck, because usually, or at some point, these books are going to be in a back bin. They're going to be in
Right.
a dollar bin, and who's going to want to read the issue where like two characters have a conversation?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or, it's setting up a big reveal that maybe happens on the last page or maybe is a cliffhanger for the next. But like, these old issues that began and ended a little short story, in other
Hmm.
words,
Hmm.
um, maybe that's one reason why um, it's hard for me to get so hooked into modern comics, besides the main reason, which is I only have so much room in my house to store comics. But
Hmm.
like the old stuff, just like you say, more bang for your buck with in terms of story and everything that happens in it.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
I think it's a fair criticism. I'm not a critical person in that way. Over much, I try to find the positive, but I think that's a fair statement.
and I love the art. Um, like we said, I didn't know this artist, but I'm looking at page 21, Panthro in the pouring rain, like
Hmm.
the rendering on, like, I know this sounds like a weird detail to point out, but like his spikes, the spikes that are on his I don't know what you'd call that, just his outfit, his uniform, just the way that they are rendered. um I don't know, I just really enjoy the art in this, which is interesting because, again, comparing it to modern comics, this probably, like we say, Star Comics probably would have been a more kid friendly thing, right? But
Hmm.
if you
Hmm.
look at this art, that is not, I don't get um kid cartoon art from it. I get just standard comic art. It's not adult in the sense of, like, blood and gore or anything like that, but just the detail in it is more just like a standard comic, instead of like if you pick up a comic today that's geared more towards the kids, the art's more simplistic.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Yeah.
there's a place for that too. I'm not throwing off on it. Um, just saying that the art in the Thundercats, probably what would have been a kid comic, um, you know, just as detailed as, Spectacular Spider-Man was that month or whatever. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm going to give a little throw out to the artist here because I've just been doing a little on the spot research. And by research, I mean Wikipedia.
yeah.
Apparently, this guy did a good bit of work with DC Comics
Oh,
and actually did some TV tie ins. Brady Bunch comics, which I've never read, Hogan's Heroes, The Twilight Zone. He has a comics biography of Dwight D. Eisenhower. So, whoo, putting that on my list. An adaptation of the Yellow Submarine film,
hmm,
and he worked with Jerry Conway in other contexts. They worked together on Wonder Woman. He and Conway were part of the team that brought back Steve Trevor after Steve Trevor was killed. And they created a character called the Lumberjack before they introduced a new version of the cheetah. So Delbo did some stuff, apparently.
that's cool.
And this is one of those things of I didn't always notice the names on the books when I could find books as a kid, but it's amazing how there are these connections. So I imagine either it looks like probably Jerry Conway and Delbo had this relationship at DC Comics that then grew into this collaboration on Thundercats, and he was also one of the artists on the Transformers Marvel series.
Very cool.
Yes,
Very cool.
yes,
What did you want to talk about? The Dynamite comics issue,
yes.
the new number one. It's, I think, in like number 13 now or something like that.
Yeah, it seems to have done well. It's taken off, and I'm going to give a shout out to Drew Moss here. I'll probably tag him in this if I'm able to, because I think you and I both met him this past summer at Heroes Con, and what a heck of a person. He signed one of my copies of the books. We had a great conversation. He gave me some stickers to take to my students. And so he does a great job on these books. And Declan Shalvey is the writer. as well as a host, a team of people that are working on them. And they've also done a spin-off with Chitara. So I'll just briefly mention that if you want a nice primer of the Thundercats, the first issue is actually not too shabby. It goes into a background about their suspended animation in the first page in a really nice, like, single page, quick origin story kind of thing. And then for those that didn't have the cardboard backing that was behind the blister pack in the 80s, the very next page in the book has the roster, the team lined up with some labels so you kind of know who people are. So just in those 2 pages, they really do a fantastic job, in my opinion, at least, of introducing you to this world so that you know who these characters are and you know what's happening. And from there, the story goes through an epic battle. There are some mysterious goings on, and there's also a character called, I think it's Calica.
I think so.
Calica that gets introduced in this part of the story as well. And it's amazing how a lot of the beats, when you look at the kind of storytelling that this is with this team, it's pretty close to it. I don't feel like there's a lot of wasted space in this issue either. It's a
Mm.
fun comparison to look on, this would be digital page 15 of the book, at the difference between when Lion-O summons the Thundercats in the Star Comics edition and how that gets rendered in the more recent version. So it's kind of some fun comparison there of like this different vision. We have the introduction or reintroduction of characters like Mum Ra, not
Mhm.
Mum Ra, because I'm pretty sure that was an Indiana Jones thing, as well as some reptilian creatures and some nice throwbacks to the mythology of the series with, is it Haga? Jaga?
I think it's with a J. I mean, I know it's spelled with a J, but I think it's pronounced as Ja.
Jaga. Okay, yeah.
Is
We
it
have
not
some,
Jaga?
or Jaga. Jaga, is it?
I think it might be Jaga. It seems like that's familiar to me, that sound.
Okay, I will say that then. So we have this nice throwback to Jaga, who is this ancestral being that was a big part of Lion-O's past, and so uh, I like the way folks at Dynamite that get to work on these books. David Pepos has done a great job with Space Ghost, in my opinion.
Mhm.
They really dig into the mythology. And they do different things. I mean, they're introducing new characters, but they're also honoring the big beats of what's happened in the past too.
Yeah, and one of the big beats I don't think we have mentioned yet is that Lion-O was supposed to be the same age as, like, Wile E.
Mhm.
Kit and Wile E. Cat. He was supposed to be another little kid running around, but something went wrong, is that right, with his
Mhm.
suspended animation, and so he went in as a kid, and everybody else was in that suspended animation, a la Cap, where they didn't age, but Lion-O did, and so he gets out, and he is a young, not man, I guess. He's a young man cat, young cat man.
Young young Catman. He's
Yeah,
a Tomcat kind of character. Yeah.
yeah. So he's big and muscular, and he's going to be the leader of the Thundercats. But it's that whole like, am I worthy? And then like he has his mentors, and there's that dynamic, and that's definitely played up in the Dynamite series. But it was also played up in the cartoon, wasn't it? The
Mhm, mhm.
cartoon and even in the Star Comics, like trying to get this young guy, up to speed and up to snuff to be able to lead, and even though he has like kind of the mind of a child in a way, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's
And
a good description of it. Not really the mind of a child, but
the mind of an adolescent, which is an interesting thing. It's a
yeah,
very interesting thing. So sort of Tom Hanks big as a giant cat,
yeah,
which is easy to imagine, strangely.
yeah. A lot of weight on his furry shoulders here. I
You talking
have,
about Tom Hanks, or are you talking
yeah,
about
I was
Lion?
talking about Tom Hanks.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then I bought the hard copies of the first, what do I got here? The first four? Nope, first five of the Thundercats. And I want to give a shout out. First of all, do you know how many covers the first issue had? I think it was about
Bunch.
130, and that's not an
What?
exaggeration. Like, because
What?
yeah, they're in the back. Like they kind of, now some of them are very similar, except you have the what do they call it? You have the title up there, but and then on some you don't have the title. And some are like the same image, but one's in color, one's in black and white. But I think if you count all these up, it's about 120, 130 different covers. Um,
That's amazing.
yeah, I got the first four issues were a painted cover with Lucio Perillo. I'm sure I'm
Uh,
butchering that name. I'm sorry, but the first one, look how epic. I don't know if you can
it's
see. Hold on.
glossy, and we'll put it on the video for listeners out there. But yeah, it's
You
that's
can't
some
see it.
chrome foil
It
beauty right
is.
there.
It makes me happy, but it's also very yeah, it's not Frank Frazetta style, but it's from that world, it's very it's like painted and almost looks like he's living and breathing on this cover here. And then Shatara was on number 2, and Panthro, our guy Panthro, is on number 3,
Yeah,
and Tigra is on number 4. But yeah, that Drew Moss, when I met him too, were we together
we
when
were
we met him?
not actually.
Okay.
I went by and met him, and then we just kind of had that connection. Like we could have met him together because he was someone both of us wanted to meet. We just didn't have that pre-planned.
Yeah. Um, but he was so nice to you and gave you the stickers. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I just told him like I have students that are fans. Shout out Rose, shout out. So I have students that are fans of the show too, which is a super cool connection as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And he, like you say, man, he was just like the nicest guy and like so humble to be such a fantastic artist.
Hmm.
He was just so humble and just a nice guy. And like you
Yeah,
say, he gave me stickers to give to my students once I mentioned that. Um, but I was a teacher too, so it was a very cool experience getting to meet him.
and I will say my students have those stickers on their laptops, on their binders. Shout out to Michael. And so yeah, the totally getting to share that fandom. It's a cool part of what we get to do. You know that as a dad, of course. I'm not a dad. I just play one on TV, but yeah, it's a cool thing to get to pass some of this stuff on.
It is. Another well, I don't want to switch gears before. Do you want to talk more about the Dynamite series, or are we good to maybe throw back to the Star comics for just a second?
I think we're good to throw back. I'll just say it's great, and I hope it continues for a while. And I hope that Silverhawks gets some traction as well.
And these covers, these first four covers, are so pretty
Hmm.
with the foil and
It's a pretty
everything.
look.
And Silverhawks,
Mm,
out of everything,
hmm.
any property is like tailor made for a foil cover, right? Like they're already
Absolutely.
silver. The only other character I could think of that would match that appropriateness would be maybe Silver Surfer, right?
Hmm.
With
Hmm.
and I know he's been done in the foil covers, but I was gonna throw back to the Star series for a second because there's one issue that I wanted to talk about for just a second, and it's number 14. And this was, I don't know if all of the Star Comics Thundercat series, if each one was an adaptation of an
Hmm.
episode. I know some were, because I'm going to talk about this one, and I know there was another one where they Lionel kind of not really breaks into, but has to go into kind of a haunted castle type of situation.
Hmm.
Pretty sure that was an episode, so maybe they all were, but this one definitely was. And this is number 14, and this is just called Safari Joe. And I was flipping back through it, in preparation for the podcast today, and I was really impressed by the storytelling and the art and the pacing. I mean, it was brisk pacing, but man, it's really good. And the art in some of these panels, very well done. It's Ernie Colin as the penciler for
Oh,
this
nice.
one, with Steve Perry as the writer. Um, I think it's Ed King does the letters. I think that's a little different from the other issue, but in this one, a big game hunter comes to the Thundercats planet, and he unpacks his gear, and he is all about. He's almost like a Craven, uh,
Oh, wow.
but except this guy, he's not. He doesn't have like animal abilities. He's just a big game hunter, the typical big game hunter with big guns and everything, and he hunts all the Thundercats down one by one because that's what he does. And um, Panthro gives him a run for his money, but then man, he kind of chickens out. He uses Panthro's one fear against him, which do you happen to know that by any chance?
I
Panthro's
don't
one fear. Yeah,
I don't remember what it was.
I didn't remember until it might have just made a one episode and issue appearance here, but apparently it's bats. So
Oh,
yeah, so you won't see a Batman Panther team up anytime soon, but that's what
I
he
would
does.
have thought sink bath, but okay.
Yeah, he he uh, he projects this big image of a bat, and that kind of freaks Panther out, and he's able to kind of get the drop on him. But then he goes up against Lion-O, the youngest, except for the Wily Kitten cat, um, and Lion-O ends up beating him with Snarf's help.
Ah, Snarf. We haven't even talked. How did we leave out Snarf until this
Well,
point? The Gwildor of the series, if you will.
he's they were playing a game in the beginning of the issue called Kick the Bucket, not like dying, but they're like literally kicking a bucket around. And that's how the uh, Snarf beats him, is because Lion-O's messed up and it's almost curtains for Lion-O. But Snarf does the whole kick the can, and the can hits the big game hunter in the head. So maybe a little bit cheesy, but also there's this great page where Lion-O uses that as a distraction, and he gets away, and they're in the dark, and Lion-O's giving this monstrous roar, 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 and
They
then
like to do things in threes.
yeah, yeah, and then gets the drop on the hunter and shows him to be nothing but a coward. And that was a big lesson for me as a kid, was reading this issue and watching that episode where Snarf says something like, Safari Joe turned out to be a big coward, didn't he, Lion-O? And then Lion-O says, most bullies are. Snarf, most bullies are. Because I know,
Mhm.
everybody has had their run in with a bully. Um, and I was no different. And just that was kind of a comforting thought, just a
Yeah,
different perspective. So good job, Thundercats, showing me the true nature of a bully.
that's right. That's right. There was that lesson moment in the cartoon episodes, and I was doing a little bit of on the spot research again while you were chatting about that. Many of these issues were based on episodes in the series, but some
Okay.
were original stories. And that was a feature of the cartoon, was that you had your sort of like Full House, stop slashing people's tires deed sort of lessons that
Right.
would make their way into the story. And I also want to throw in here that I am terrified of sink baths. I am.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, I'm working on it. I blame Dolores.
Yeah. Okay.
That's going to be my new catchphrase. I blame Dolores.
All right. I like it.
Thanks.
Um, it was a good series. It's a great property. I'm glad to see it's getting some modern love. I'd like to see a movie. I'd like to see a new cartoon series. Who knows? Maybe, maybe not.
There was a film in the 80s. I think it was called Thundercats Ho.
I think so.
And they were going to do a theatrical release on it. So little IMDb trivia here is that the production on the show actually started about 2 years before it was released. So it really started around like 1983, I guess that would be. And they were planning to do a theatrical release of the film, but then they were doing crazy things with 80s characters.
Yeah,
Optimus Prime being the best example of traumatic
that was
experiences.
rough.
Yeah. And then the folks that did G.I. Joe did the same thing to Duke, but rescued him, even though the writer of that movie, Buzz Dixon has said that, yeah, that he did intend for that character to die to make room for new action figures. But quickly these executives learned that when they put a character out there, if you killed the character, it wasn't like kids were just going to be like, "Okay, I'm going to go to like the next one," because that's what kids sound like. But they build this connection to these characters. So
They do.
yeah.
They do. We did. And, like, I know on one hand, the 80s are full of nostalgia for us Gen Xers with the toys and the music and the properties and all that stuff. And you have the detractors, like we've said, that each episode was just a 30-minute commercial for the toy. Maybe.
Hmm.
But these characters really did mean something to us too. They
Yeah,
were more than just a toy. And I don't know, like, I don't know if kids play with figures as much as they did back in our day.
I don't know that they do, but they should.
They
They
should,
should.
because think about how much imagination we
Hmm.
used, like writing these stories. And like, if you
Hmm.
didn't have this one character, you would somehow invent the story to go along with the character that you had, the figure that you had.
Hmm.
There was a lot of imagination there. So maybe these cartoons were 30-minute commercials for the toys, but you know what? Those toys, I think, built a whole lot of imagination.
Agreed.
I don't want to get up on some old man soapbox about, kids and their tachograms and their Instabooks and all the things.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
Netflix me. Yeah, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that.
but like, I don't know. Yeah, I think there was a lot of imagination that
Agreed.
went with these characters and toys back in the 80s. I know it was
And
for me.
you and I are both reading teachers. We're both like, our lives were shaped by this stuff. So let us not forget that the action figures in He-Man came with tiny, tiny comics.
They did.
You
Yeah,
know, so I mean, whether you regard comics as reading or not, which I do
which you
strongly,
should.
and you should, yeah.
You should. I'll die on that hill. You should.
Yeah, yeah, I will as well.
Yeah.
That was an introduction to reading for kids that, if you didn't have a library card, but somebody in your family would get you an action figure, you also got a book.
And
So,
the super powers, they came with a comic
mhm,
too.
mhm, yeah,
Yeah, I remember those very well.
yeah,
So this is totally random and doesn't really have to do with Thundercats, but it's Thundercats adjacent because these things started out as cartoons, and of course they came to life through the voice actors, right?
yeah,
Well,
mhm,
a lot of these voice actors, you can find them doing other things. You can find them making convention appearances and things like that. The He-Man guy,
mhm,
one of the
mhm.
most iconic voices, and I'm blanking on his name. Maybe you could look it up while I
I will do that.
blather on here. He doesn't make convention appearances, and he's been told so many times that people go crazy to see you, but for some reason, that's just not his thing. Well, I looked him up and I tried to find him in other things. And the only other thing I found him in, he might have been in some Western,
Oh,
because that might have been, or, it would have been that era when they were so popular. But he was in a car commercial. Did you find his
huh.
name?
I have not. I'm still
Okay.
searching because this is another series that's been redone and all that.
Oh, yeah.
So just looking for the right He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. But I am on it. I am on it.
But he did a car commercial and it was pre He-Man. So you're talking like late 70s or
Hmm.
maybe even mid 70s. I don't know. And he's the car salesman. And
Yeah.
the guy, the customer saying, "Well, does it have this?" And he's like, "Yes, it has this." And like, just to hear that voice and put it with a face, it's very unique because, like I say, he doesn't do a lot of appearances, and maybe he was in some big show for most of the run that I don't know as a like live action. Um, but it was unique to see him uh, in live action with that voice. Did you find
Yeah.
his name?
I sure did. That would be John Irwin.
That's
He
right,
was
John.
Prince Adam, He-Man, Ram-Man, Beastman, Faker, Webstore, Whiplash, Granomir, and other characters.
That's right. That's right.
And you know who else was a voice on that show?
Who's that?
That would be Alan Oppenheimer
Ah,
as well. Yeah. Popular voice actor, person, star thing that was in Brave Star and other properties and continues. Like he's done more recent voice work with Chip and Dale and Superman and Batman. So uh, a cool thing. Absolutely. Let's see. What else was he in? I'll delete this as far as the time goes for the quickness of this, but I'm thinking he had a prominent role in Transformers.
speaking of Transformers, that's one of my favorite voice actor stories of all time.
Oh yeah.
Um, and I forget his name, but the guy who did Optimus Prime,
Hmm.
he was at a convention and they said, "How did you come up with the voice for Optimus Prime?" And if there's any listeners out there, you should really search this on YouTube because it's such a great story where he said that he's out of work and he's trying to, you know, make get a job in the voice acting industry, and they call him to come read for Optimus Prime. And his brother, who he was living with, and he said that he really respected his brother. His brother says something like, "Well, what are you reading for?" "Well, I'm reading for a truck," and of course that gets laughs. He said,
Hmm.
"Well, no, he's supposed to be a leader," and his brother tells him, "Well, what kind of leader are you going to be? Are you going to be the loud and blustery one, or are you going to be the quiet leader, the leader that's more like sincere and everything?" And
Hmm.
that's when he does his voice. He's like, and that's where the voice comes from,
Optimus Prime.
Optimus Prime. So
That was
it's
Peter Cullen. Peter
that's right,
Cullen.
that Peter
Yeah.
Cullen. Yeah, just one of my favorite stories from any voice actor ever.
Yeah, and Alan Oppenheimer was Warpath, Sea Spray, and a number of other characters, Beachcomber. So it's also kind of cool how these characters overlap a little bit. And another one of those things of like, I didn't think about who made the comics when I read them, but now that I'm older, I do. And so I think about the actors, and I'm totally going to Google or YouTube or Instatalk that car commercial later.
Yeah, it's so fun. It's really fun. But where are we headed next with the Comic Obsessive podcast?
Yeah, I know you're a big Spidey fan, so
I
we
am.
have a few interview episodes coming up as the new year is upon us. We're going to be checking out a couple of opportunities to talk with some of our favorite people, the way we did last year. But I believe we're also headed to, is it Web of Spider-Man?
Yeah, it's Web of Spider-Man is the series that replaced the much beloved Marvel team up.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and I don't think it ever got the love and respect that like Amazing Spider-Man did. I guess that's kind of the flagship title. But Web of Spider-Man had some really good storylines and
Yeah,
great art, and so we'll pick a couple of those to talk about.
cool, cool. Are we going to do our miscellaneous bits
Yep.
section?
Yeah.
Yep, yep.
What's
Well,
go ahead.
it's a brand new segment on today's show, kids. It's exciting. We're going to talk about random things.
Yep.
Yeah. So I will talk about my love of horror films that's really just been kindled this past year. I was on another podcast talking about the movie Long Legs with a comics friend of mine, and really didn't get into horror other than a few examples like The Shining. The Shining is always going to be one of those that stands out to me. But this year, I kind of rekindled some of that love and found some really strong appreciation for some areas of the genre. I'm not a gore fan, and I don't mean that in a political way. I mean that as like I don't like blood and guts. So that's not really my vibe, but I do like a good suspense story. I did enjoy Long Legs, but for the new year, I made sure to see Nosferatu if you haven't seen it. There are some slow moments in the story beats, but Lily Rose Depp kills it, as does Bill Skarsgård and Willem Dafoe. Great cast, wonderful performances. The cinematography is excellent. You'll never know it's Bill Skarsgård. Everything that he does in the movie is sort of like he's so it's strange. I can't even do it. That wasn't even it. But it's very like labored and tense. That's a little more Irish or English brogue than I wanted to go with that, but it's a cool accent. I'll do it on the next episode for
All
the
right.
entire episode,
Okay. Yeah.
and probably go to sleep after. But that's a great film, and I also got to check out finally from a few years back the film *Malignant*, which was kind of like science fiction meets body horror. It was really interesting. There are some twists there that I didn't realize were part of the story that I really enjoyed. Definitely a psychological kind of story. So I would recommend that. And it's directed by James Wan, who directed the films Aquaman, much loved, Aquaman 2, not as loved. And speaking of that, you know who's continuing to be in the DC universe?
Who's Jason Momoa?
Jason Momoa as your friend and mine. He gets along with everybody. He treats small children well. Lobo.
Yeah.
So
He's like kind of the cute and cuddly character,
he is. He's
of the
so
DC
adorable.
universe. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's the one they'll make plushies of him, and like, the Garfield that sticks to windows will probably do a Lobo since he's so cute.
Oh yes.
Um,
Yes.
no,
Absolutely.
Lobo, that's perfect casting in my humble
Mm-hmm.
opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Lobo is kind of a send up of the Wolverine type character. Yeah, I think he was supposed to be kind of satire when they first,
Yeah.
yeah,
He was.
like over the top Wolverine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything was like just, like we say, it was satire, it was exaggerated, but he ended up getting a pretty big fan following, which I don't know what that says about uh, maybe me and you and the '90s kids. That satire, we're like, oh no, dude, that's awesome. That's not funny. That's
Oh
awesome.
yeah. Oh yeah. Well,
um,
and you know why he was created? Um, it was actually. Hold on a second. So many wonderful trivia bits on this episode. Keith Giffen was
right.
the at least the co-creator of him. Keith Giffen, according to the story I've heard and been told, he didn't like working on the books he was working on. I don't think he got along with editorial at the time. There was some friction there, and so he created Lobo as a way to get fired.
Oh,
And then it took off and people loved it. And he was like, man, if this
yeah.
was a not a kid friendly show, I would use his exact words. But
All
he
right.
he really did not anticipate that it would be a popular character. But Lobo has continued to be awesome, yeah, in
Yeah.
my
I mean,
opinion.
I've looked back at some of those Lobo issues and like the '90s series that I'm gonna mispronounce his name, Val Mayerick.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Valmy Eric. Hmm.
Penciled, did the art for, and was it Giffen doing the writing at that time?
Yeah, yeah. He also did a lot of like plot breakdowns and things
Yeah,
like that. Yeah.
and that was good, and that art
Hmm.
was beautiful. It was
Yeah.
a really fun. Like, I didn't read every one, but I've read a lot of them, and that was good stuff. And they just had a Lobo special. Um, I don't know what, couple months ago, the
Yeah,
Lobo special,
and if you're
one
a
shot.
listener who's older or a '90s kid at heart, I would recommend that one too. It has some really cool jokes in it. It was
It
Kyle
does.
Starks. Kyle Starks is hilarious, amazing writer, just sarcastic guy. It's fun to talk to at conventions too, and so I would recommend checking that out as well.
Yeah. And the only other thing I have is, at least a mention of the trailer that just came out
Uh,
a week or two ago at this point,
mhm.
for what's his name? I don't think many people know him.
Yeah, kind of they're really pulling him out. I mean, DC's doing the Craven thing here at this point. This guy, like, who's heard of him?
What's his
Bum,
name?
ba-dum, bum, bum, bum.
Super something,
Super
Superman.
something.
Yeah.
Crypto, I think is his name. Crypto.
Crypto. Yeah, I think Crypto stole the show.
Yeah.
in that trailer. I think everybody loved Crypto, but it looks good. The Superman trailer looks good. It looks to me it looks good. It looks hopeful. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it looks like that's the tone of the whole movie is going to be maybe hopeful and yeah. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, and I know people like to get in disagreements to make life interesting about things, and I know there are the people that prefer the Snyder films. There are people that prefer other versions, but I do have to say, from everything I know about James Gunn, uh, I respect and admire the fact that when he got this job as Superman, he posted it on social media that it was actually an anniversary of, I believe, his father passed away
Uh,
on the anniversary of the time that he found out, which of course, that plays to the lineage of how we come to know these stories. But he's a fan's creator, I would say. He creates for the fans. This is why we have Jason Momoa as Lobo.
yeah.
This is why his one rule with DC films is that he's not going to greenlight anything until there's actually a script. Imagine that. So I believe that the man will do a good job. Will it be perfect? Nothing ever is, but I think that he's got the sensibility and the chops, and he knows his stuff. So I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. I think it'll be a good movie. I look forward to it. Well, I guess that probably wraps us up for this episode.
I think so. Shall we say, "Take me home, crypto"? Is that what we say?
All right. Yeah, there you go. Maybe we should start signing off with that one. Thank
Thundercats.
Thundercats Ho, Thundercats Crypto. I don't know.
I like
Combine
it.
it
I
all.
like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, um, I guess we'll just sign off by saying stay obsessive.
Stay obsessive, everybody. About comics, not about arguments, not about Insta talks, but about comics, please.